invidious discrimination, it's only like discrimination if it's just like some sort of rational or like.
If you've got a logical reason, another good example of this with the San Antonio Spurs, and I gather that some of you like basketball, David Robinson went to the Naval Academy and he was 7 feet tall. When you go to the Naval Academy, you have to have a service commitment typically afterwards, and I think David Robinson was training for a submarine, something along those lines. Well, a 7-foot guy in a submarine, I mean, that doesn't work, and ultimately his commitment was waived. Part of it, I think, had something to do with physical standard. There's a rational reason there. You see what I'm saying? They couldn't accommodate that one. So that's maybe a little bit easier of kind of addressing the question from the other way that you had started with. What else do y'all have? Go ahead.
The roller coaster ride is an example of...
It's actually an example of where it would be legal. Invidious would be one where you're just saying somebody can't do something and there's no reason. Boys are better at math and girls are better at English.
Counting the soap bubbles in the bar, so somebody can't.
Well, let's save that answer for something else. But the idea is that if you discriminate somebody and there's no rational reason, the idea that you would say that men could drive better than women, women could drive better than men, that's going to be a hard one to say. I'm not going to have women driving for my taxi company because they're not as good at drivers. I mean, I suppose you could find some statistics for that, but that's much different. The idea of maturity for driving or voting or drinking, that makes sense. That's accepted at this point. And the question that it asks in there is who determines what's rational or not? Well, ultimately, it's the Supreme Court, so it kind of depends on what their membership is. What else have you got up here?
The Racial Integrity Act.
You know what? Don't worry about that one. I'll go ahead and remove question number 1 right now. I'll remove question number 1 from chapter 5 right now. Notice up here, and I guess I'll make it bigger for you, Nemi. I heard you again. There you go. I'll make it bigger for you. Let's go back into the chapter a little bit, and let's deal with the articles. There were a series of articles that were up here that were kind of good ones. We had political correctness, we had NBA dress code, Surgeon General everybody had, and I think both of y'all had body cameras as well. Have y'all got questions about the political correctness articles? Because we spent a lot of time on the political correctness articles.
What's the political correctness?
What's the political correctness articles? There were 7 articles on that page, and they were dealing with the woman in Michigan who tried to advertise for a Christian roommate. Was that legal?
No.
They said she needed some training because technically she was discriminating. Can you think of any of the other quirky things that we had from that page?
Short people.
What about short people?
They didn't want the word midget to be.
They wanted to be...
What was the name of the group? Little People of America said that the M word was actually a word that was offensive. And what word did they compare it to? The N word. And some people kind of appreciated that. And the argument was that if you are of a particular group, it's not what we think, it's not what the majority thinks, it's not what any of us as individuals think, but it's what the group thinks. So if they're offended by it, then they should not have to hear it. They wanted the FCC to ban the word. Others of you said, wait a minute, if you're comparing this to the N-word, the N-word has got a much different violent history than just simply the categorization of the M-word does. And that seemed to upset some folks, but they actually wanted that word banned. Do you remember the thing about tall people?
I remember Delaware.
Anybody remember the tall people? Tall people typically get paid more. Do you remember how much it was?
A couple hundred.
I think it was about $800 an inch is
Yep.
what it was. Every inch higher you were, you got on average $800 extra a year. This is a quick, and I think it's like 6 foot. So above, yeah. But the idea was $800 every extra inch. So not only were short people, you could argue, discriminated against, little people to say it properly, I guess, but tall people got benefits. Again, this was what we were talking about with political correctness. There was the one school in New York that had said that they were going to prohibit using Mr. or Mrs. because not everybody is Mr. or Mrs. anymore, Mr. or Miss, but there are other genders that are involved, because that was something that was maybe potentially offensive to folks. You remember Delaware, Lisa. What was Delaware?
They were teaching them words they shouldn't say around people.
Like what kinds of words or what kinds of things did they say that you weren't supposed to say?
Like to the Latin Americans, you tell them, can you help me fix my yard?
Can you help me with my landscaping? You're not supposed to say that. What's that, Toby?
Weren't you not allowed to say like dinosaur?
Well, this is the Delaware Department of Transportation. We'll come back to that one. Go ahead.
It was like you weren't allowed to ask a black person if they wanted fried chicken or something.
Fried chicken or watermelon, if you remember something like that. Go ahead, Michael.
You ask an Asian where the Chinese restaurants are.
Where the Chinese restaurant is. Are you the IT person? Go ahead, James.
Or you can ask a gay person if they needed help.
If they thought about getting help, if they told their parents, you couldn't call white folks trailer trash. If you remember on this, Delaware caught some hell. They were trying to do the right thing by kind of covering themselves from potential lawsuits, but they actually listed a lot of stuff that you weren't supposed to say, which would just put it fresher in people's minds. And not only that, but if they left something off the list, that would seem to imply that you could conceivably say certain things that maybe you shouldn't have. And they had things in there about older folks, and you kind of get the idea. But take a good look at that. Do you remember they also said that you're not supposed to say, well, actually, talking about the fried chicken and the watermelon, who else did we specifically talk about with fried chicken and collard greens? Tiger Woods. What was the Tiger Woods deal?
There was a white gopher.
Who was the white golfer? Who was the white golfer?
Wait, he wasn't a golfer. He was like
He was a golfer.
He was a golfer.
He was a golfer.
At the moment, he wasn't like a golfer.
Yeah, at the moment he was. His career fell off after this, but he was at the time. What was the guy's name?
Was he participating in the PGA?
Fuzzy Zeller. Yeah, I think he was. He just got beat by Tiger, so he was salty. He was salty. Fuzzy Zeller, what did Fuzzy say?
He called him boy, and then
He called him boy, that's true. What else?
fried chicken and collard greens.
He said, well, what was this in reference to, though?
Like after he won, they were like serving him.
I'll say again.
After
Zoom in on James. Go ahead, James. Speak up loudly.
Okay, so after like he won like a golf tournament,
Yeah.
then they should just serve him like a dinner, like when they congratulate him, like just fried chicken and collard greens.
After you won the I believe it was the U.S. Open, after you won the U.S. Open, the next year the winner got to pick the dinner. And if you'll recall, he was a little salty about having gotten defeated by Tiger, and he did. He didn't just call him boy. I believe he called him, that little boy is putting well, he's playing well, this kind of thing, which right there is problematic. But then he goes on and says, you just tell him not to serve fried chicken next year at the dinner, or collard greens, or whatever the hell they eat. And this is what he said as he was walking away. And yeah, it was very, very problematic. If you remember the Seinfeld clip, what happened in the Seinfeld clip that I showed you? What's that? Native American references. Go ahead, zoom in on Samantha. What were some of these references? And use your judgment on this.
He wanted to date this girl, but everything that he did to her was like wrong.
And the girl herself was
a Native American.
She was, and he didn't know it.
He had no idea. He brought a statue and he was doing all these like rituals or just playing around, but and she just like stepped out.
What kinds of words did he pause as he was?
He paused when saying reserve. Again, reservations for
Reservation for dinner. What else? Indian giver at the end. He never said that one. She dropped that one on him.
He got the tickets. He said he got them from a scalper.
He started to say scalper, but he caught it, this kind of a thing. And this was actually the clip where he asked the mailman where the Chinese restaurant was, but the mailman happened to be Asian, and he took great offense to it. So, I mean, it's funny when you talk about political correctness, you've got all these examples out there. Sometimes we're maybe even just trying to give somebody a compliment, but we can say something that would be inappropriate. Do you remember the best example, though, of giving somebody a compliment that could be taken very, very wrongly, and it had to do with the 2008 presidential election? Had to deal with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
What did Joe Biden say, Gabs? Yeah, zoom in on Gabs.
I can't remember now.
What did Joe Biden say in 2008? It seemed like an almost unqualifiedly positive thing. Go ahead, Michael.
He said something about Obama being a black person and qualified.
Okay, he said something about black person, but there were other things that he said. Go ahead, Toby.
He said he was like breaking the norm.
Yeah.
He was like.
How?
He was like, he came up polite and he was very presentable.
He said he was bright and clean and articulate. And it's like a fairy tale, man. And if you remember, the Delaware Department of Transportation said you're not supposed to say to your African American coworkers, you are articulate, because that's something that would imply that typically African American folks are not. Or we talked about this within the context of people that speak other languages, that in fact you're not supposed to do that as well. So kind of keep that in mind. Anything else off of that sheet? There was Delaware, there was Iowa Department of Aging with the older folks. There was, okay, you said dinosaur. Go ahead, Toby, go with that. Yeah, zoom in on it, James.
I don't remember, but I'm taking a guess. I think they weren't allowed to say dinosaurs in schools.
Dinosaurs on standardized tests.
Oh,
The
standardized.
New York City schools were basically saying that you could not, in fact, use certain words on standardized tests because these might detract from learning because they're offensive. Dinosaur was one of those words. What else was?
Birthdays.
Birthdays. Go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question.
Yeah.
When you ask about the political correctness, like
Yeah.
how exactly, like if you just give like certain examples, or we have to like list them all?
Well, we'll see how the question goes, but all of these are potential answers for the political correctness.
Okay.
So this could be multiple choice, or this could be short answer.
Okay.
Yeah. So, what other words? Halloween, dinosaur,
Dancing.
birthdays.
Dancing.
Anything else?
Junk food.
Junk food was the other one that kind of jumps out as well. These were all banned as being words that should not be said. What do you remember about the NBA dress code? Go ahead, Gabs.
The guy on the talk show wasn't dressed appropriately and they wanted them to dress in a suit and ties.
Allen Iverson. What was the NBA dress code? How did it work?
No baggy clothes.
Yeah.
No
Well, hang on, one at a time. No baggy clothes. What else?
Loose jewelry and stuff like that.
They call it loose jewelry.
Well, I mean, I'm
Chain.
Go ahead.
overzealous.
Pretty much the description of the attire that they could not wear started to represent a certain type of attire, a certain type of race people would
Gangster.
think would wear. So by saying that, they're pretty much saying, oh, that you're pretty much describing how black people or something like that.
This is exactly, yeah. They listed a list of things as part of the dress code that you could not wear. And they said things like no headphones indoors, no caps cocked to the side, no do-rags, no wife beater tees, no baggy sweats, rumpled sweats, these kinds of things. They also said no chains with pendants the approximate size and weight of a small child. Now, I'm sure the language wasn't quite that way, but when I showed you the Iverson clip, baggy clothes, hat cocked to the side, the enormous jewelry, and the gangsta thing that you had mentioned, Lisa, is probably the best way of saying it. And in fact, the article mentions that several of the players said that this is an urban dress and it's designed for the black players, not for the white ones. How could the NBA have gotten around this charge of discrimination? Go ahead, Ian.
Instead of saying what they shouldn't wear, tell them what they should be wearing.
Yeah.
Suits,
If they
ties.
would have said business casual or a certain kind of shoe or tie and coat suit, this kind of a thing. And it's funny, the players were very much against it in the beginning. The players today are actually very much in favor of it because they recognize the marketing possibilities. Go ahead.
But this is the same article with the guy who was paid $8 million, right?
Who was that guy?
Marcus.
Marcus Camby got paid $8 million a year to play 82 basketball games, which is basically about $100,000 a game, which is about $100,000 for 2 hours of clock time. And he said, if you're going to require me to have a dress code, then you need to pay me for it. And the NBA might have messed up because they imposed this on the players. It was not part of the labor contract. What was the NBA's argument? We haven't talked about that. What was their argument for wanting the dress code? Go ahead, Tom.
They were saying that you're a representative of the team, and that you were basically a marketing plot. Well, you're marketing yourself, or like the team.
You're marketing the league, and if you give the bad image or the wrong image, then in fact you're going to detract. So we want the right image so that people don't get scared away or turned off. And I had given you the Iverson clip. He was the pre-dress code NBA player. You remember who the post-NBA player was? Post-dress code? Chris Paul. He had the coat, he had the tie, he even had his little son, I believe, on his lap at the post-game press conference. He looked very, very different. James, push the red button.